Hi, and welcome to our visit to the National Trust House and Gardens at Polesden Lacey in Surrey. You'll find Polesden Lacey in the southeast of England, just 5 miles from junction 9 of the M25, and this video is brought to you from 3 separate visits to Polesden Lacey. You'll find once you arrive there's plenty of parking as well as EV charging. We'll take you through the dairy courtyard, through the stable courtyard, a long lime walk to the pet cemetery, past the ladies' garden, onto the rose garden, passing through other gardens as we go, before heading back to the house, where we step inside to explore this magnificent Edwardian home. So without further ado, let's get started. As I mentioned, we're going to walk through the dairy courtyard, which has a coffee shop and toilets, before heading on to the stable courtyard, where you'll find the cafe, shop and ticket office. A word of advice: always check the National Trust website before you travel. I'll include a link in the description because often there's temporary exhibitions and maybe some parts are closed. So let's get our tickets and walk under the water tower and onto the gardens. You'll receive a map to the Polesden Lacey grounds and gardens when you arrive, but I'll include a link to the PDF from the National Trust website in the description below. As I mentioned before, this is the amalgamation of 3 visits, and don't think the blue skies are the summer's days. We'll now take a slow amble along Lime Walk, which provides beautiful shade on a bright sunny day. And this will lead us to the pet cemetery. And it's now time that I introduce you to the last owner of Polesden Lacey, and that's Margaret Greville. And this is where she laid her beloved dogs to rest. Now you may not know the name Margaret Greville, but you may know her father. He was William McEwen, and he brewed McEwen's Scottish Ale, which made him a very wealthy man. So much so, in 1906 he bought Polesden Lacey for his daughter and her husband. However, Ronald died in 1908, just 2 years after he moved in, with Margaret dying in 1942, and is laid to rest in the ladies' garden at Polesden Lacey. Upon her death, the grounds, the house and its contents were bequeathed to the National Trust. Now, one of the many reasons we wanted to visit Polesden Lacey was for its beautiful walled rose garden. However, our visit in early spring, despite the blue skies, was just too early. This meant we had to come back, and this time in early June. This meant the roses were in full bloom, but of course, being a British summer, the blue skies had gone. But those threatening clouds can't mask the wonderful scent of these English summer roses. And while you enjoy the blooms, I guess it's time for me to say, if you're enjoying this video, then please give us a like. We'd really appreciate it. And if you like my style of video, then why not subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of our future travels. If you're a gardening enthusiast, then Polesden Lacey is the place for you. If you find a gardener, then they're more than happy to share their hints and tips to get the best out of an English cottage garden. And don't forget, if you see a specimen you like, you may be able to pick it up at the shop as you leave. And if you can't, don't worry, most of the planting is labelled, so take a snap on your phone. When you get home, search online and you may be able to find the specimen available. Whatever your interest, do make the time to enjoy the gardens. If the weather's with you, of course. So Polesden Lacey is one of those National Trust properties that's open or partially open most of the year. And although the roses are not really in full bloom until mid-May, there's still plenty to see in the gardens the rest of the time. So our visit on a crisp April day meant that the gardens were quite quiet and we were able to catch the last of the winter garden. and the spring borders were starting to enter bloom, but across the thatch bridge the old kitchen garden was laying dormant. Polesden Lacey does lend you to explore, and our next destination is the rock garden. And as you climb through, once again you end up with lovely views across the Surrey countryside. What you have to remember is this was a garden built to impress, and we are now making our way back to the house, past what would have once been tennis courts, now a croquet lawn. To the north we have the double herbaceous border, and beyond that we have the walled Iris and Lavender Garden. And once again we're in prime season, so you do have to be careful because the bees are doing their business. The croquet lawn is used by local clubs during the week. However, at weekends you can book it out, so check out the details in the description below. Now, as we close in on the house and we admire the views of the countryside beyond, let me give you a few details about the house. The first home was built here in 1336. The estate was bought again in 1630 and the medieval structure demolished and a new house built. But that wasn't the last time. Once again the estate changed hands in 1818 and the whole lot was demolished and rebuilt under the supervision of Thomas Cubitt from 1821 to 23. That gives us the basis of the house that we see before us. However, the story of expansion doesn't end here. In 1902 it was extended even further, and once again in 1906, when the Grevilles took ownership, changes were made. But what we see before us today is the house as the Grevilles would have known it. Now I think it's time to take a step inside. And it's really no surprise, but it's designed to impress. One thing I would like to point out, this is a story of two visits, and you may notice that upstairs is corned off in our April visit. Once again, those wonderful National Trust volunteers provide so much depth and detail to the story of the house. We were told on our visit that the woodwork for a lot of the reception area was recovered from a church in London that was being demolished. And you can see that in places. And if you want to know who stepped through this lavish hallway, well, there'll be more details of that later. But first, let me introduce you to our host, Margaret Greville. And this portrait is how we come to discover Polesden Lacey. In Series 2, Episode 2 of Hidden Treasures of the National Trust, this portrait went away for restoration, and this is her now she's been restored. Originally this portrait hung at the top of the stairs. Now it takes pride of place in the dining room. Although the more I read about Dame Margaret, I guess the less I like. She attended a Nuremberg rally in 1934 and come back full of praise for Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. As a socialite, she loved rubbing shoulders with the rich and famous, but had no time for ordinary folk. I guess she's not alone in that. Now, on our summer visit, we do have the option to head upstairs, so let's take a look. So one couple to walk through this hallway was the Duke and Duchess of York, who held their honeymoon here in 1923 as guests of Margaret. He later became George VI, King of England. And now we enter Margaret's bedroom, but don't expect to find any of her jewellery here. She left everything to Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, and her jewellery can be seen in the presence of the royal family to this day. Margaret's tiara is a favourite of Camilla, the Queen Consort. It'd be fair to say her jewellery collection was impressive. Now I have to say the bathroom is slightly less impressive, or maybe this isn't the most opulent one. I'm not sure the National Trust shows you everything. What you will find is there's often changing events, and often stories to be told. And I know I'm sounding like a broken record, but do check the site for details of what's on when you plan to visit. In 2024, it was The Last Tree and the Art of Nature. In 2025, it's Dressed to Impress, and who knows what 2026 will bring. However, do remember, on our spring visit, the upstairs was closed, but there's still plenty to see on your visit. Another treat for us was Margaret's Faberge egg, on display in the upstairs space. It was fantastic to see an example of this great Russian art form. I wish it had been opened really. It would have been nice to see what was inside. Polesden Lacey is awash with artworks. This one of the Port of London caught our eye. But if you're interested in anything specific from Polesden Lacey, once again, it's their website. You can check out their entire collection online. And our journey now takes us downstairs, and we head through the kitchen. Now this looks a lot smaller than the photograph we've just seen, so I guess the National Trust have created something to represent the kitchen perhaps in its later days. A little less Downton Abbey and a little more homely. I love the fact that it's set up as if it was ready to serve a meal, and this room leads directly onto the dining room. But obviously we've seen that, so we'll skip it and enter the hall, discover more of the lower floor. And again, it's awash with artworks. It can take you an age to walk the length of it because there are so many pieces. But don't forget to look up too, because the ceilings are wonderfully ornate. So I guess the question is, how long will it take to visit Polesden Lacey? I think the question is, how many times will you want to visit Polesden Lacey? Because there is just so much to see. And also there's the seasonality of the gardens. So plan your visit and perhaps plan to return. It may be worth a National Trust membership. So now we've walked the length of the hallway, it's into our first room. And this is known as the library. But it seems a little bit more multifunctional. Maybe part office, part lounge, but certainly it is a library. On the desk you'll notice pictures of William McEwen. In fact, he moved in along with Margaret and her husband, and this was his last home. He passed away in 1913. And leading off the library is the study, probably where William McEwen kept his affairs in order, and he must have done because when he died in 1913, his estate was worth 1.5 million. That's around about 150 million in today's money. Anyway, as impressive as that is, now my favourite room, the saloon. And this should take your breath away. We were lucky enough on our summer visit to have someone playing the piano, which created a wonderful atmosphere. So this gold saloon was Margaret's idea. She famously said she wanted a place where she could entertain Maharajas in. And I certainly think this fits the bill. I don't think there's much more I can add, so I'm going to be quiet until we're ready to visit our next room. We're now going to head along the corridor to our next room, which is the much more intimate tea room. And it's set up as if guests are expected to arrive at any moment. Our next room looks a little odd. This is the billiard room. I guess this is a place where gentlemen could retire after socialising. And in addition to the billiard table, there are reminders of William McEwen scattered around the room. And that seems fitting, as this legacy is dedicated to him. We head into the smoking room, and once again we find a portrait of William. There's also something else rather interesting in the smoking room. A spade used by Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, to plant a tree in 1977 on the silver jubilee of her daughter's reign. I'm sure she would have been wearing some of Margaret's jewellery on the occasion. Now that's our last room of the house, but we've still got time to pop into the Second-Hand Bookstore, a must when we visit a National Trust property, to see if there's something we can pick up to add to our bookshelves. After a quick look, we head out the west entrance and make our way back to the car park. As we stroll through the blossom lawn, it's time for me to thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed what we put together. Stay safe, stay well, and happy travels.